Welcome to a special bonus episode of Talking Cars. I'm Keith Barry, and I'm joined by Dr. Quinta Warren, who leads Consumer Reports' Sustainability Policy Team. And Quinta, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Since this is the first time that I think our Talking Cars audience will be meeting you, why don't you talk a little about what you do at CR, what you did before CR, because it's a very interesting story, and the path that got you here.
Keith, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. As you said, I lead the sustainability policy work at Consumer Reports. But before I got here, I had, quite an interesting career. I started out actually working in oil and gas, and I worked, actually developing new methods and chemicals for capturing CO2. I ended up, being the person that was determining where we would drill oil and gas wells to make the most profit. And then I worked for government. So I actually worked on CO2 capture policies with the US government and the Department of Energy. And then I also worked with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Interestingly, I've also run a consulting firm. So I worked for myself for a while, and I was working with entrepreneurs in different parts of Africa, trying to provide technical expertise on energy and water for them. And that's, all of that led me to Consumer Reports because I'm really passionate about sustainability. And I wanted the opportunity to do more work for consumers to do a lot of the things that I'm doing now. So in my current role, I lead a team of engineers and policy analysts. And really what we're doing is trying to make sure that when government is putting out policies tied to sustainability, that there's someone there speaking up on behalf of consumers, and that's us. So we're running analyses. We're trying to figure out how consumers are impacted. Will these policies actually save us money? Will they, reduce emissions? Are they good for us? Somebody has to be there to figure all of that out, and that's what my team and I do.
And the reason why you're here today is because a lot of those consumers, a lot of those are members, readers, listeners, viewers, have these questions about all these things that are changing in the auto industry right now. And I think to a lot of people, they can feel a little consumer unfriendly to some people, or they can feel like it's happening really fast and there's a lot to take on. I wanted to talk to you specifically because, I can go and interview experts and then tell people tell Talking Cars what I've learned. But why not actually just bring the expert here and have those questions go to you? So what Quinta didn't mention is that her PhD is in chemical and biomolecular engineering. So you have that really interesting sort of both sides of the technical expertise as well as the advocacy expertise. So I think it's really cool to be able to ask some of the questions that we've got. I'll start off with one that I hear a lot from people when they meet me and find out what I do. And it's always, whoa, electric cars. Why does it feel like, all of a sudden there's these new tax credits, there are all these new models, we're installing new charging stations at our test track because there are so many of these cars for us to test. We just bought like a half a dozen plug-in hybrids to test. Why is this like all of a sudden it feels like within the past year and a half that everything is changing around electric cars and hybrids and plug-in hybrids?
Yeah, electric vehicles have become really popular, right? So, as you said, in the last couple of years, a lot of people have just, shown a lot of interest in buying EVs. So, I want to make it clear that, the government is not forcing us to buy EVs. That's not really what's happening here. What's happening is government is trying to reduce emissions, and it just so happens that EVs are among the best way of doing that when it comes to transportation. So if everyone's going to drive, they may as well drive vehicles that have zero tailpipe emissions. Besides that, there are a lot of good things about electric vehicles, right? So in complying with government's push to reduce emissions, manufacturers can produce whatever kind of cars they want. Right, they can produce hybrids, plug-in hybrids, they can produce hydrogen vehicles, they can produce EVs. EVs are winning out because that's what's selling on the market. Consumers just love them, and they love them for a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons is just how much money you save on fueling and maintenance if you're driving an EV versus if you're driving a gas car, right? You're saving on average $10,000 over the life of the vehicle. And who would not want to do that? You don't have to maintain, there's not as much maintenance required because there are fewer spinning parts, right? You don't have to have oil changes. You don't have to replace your spark plugs. I mean, you really just buy the car and you just own it, right? You occasionally replace the tires. Who would not want that? And then there's just the convenience for people who are able to charge at home. So you drive to work or you drive to wherever you're going and you come back home, you just plug the car in and forget about it. I think we underestimated the number of people who hate going to fill up their cars because this is one of the things that comes up consistently as one of the benefits of owning EVs.
I do want to go back a little bit. I mean, first of all, I really like that you said that if you have to drive, it's the most, because that's kind of like EVs aren't gonna like instantly stop climate change like that. There are still emissions that come from, they're not tailpipe emissions. We would,
Right.
if we took public transit, if we walked, cycled, etc., that sort of transition away from that. So I like the fact that you, but I just kind of want to go back a little bit about to unpack a little what you said about that sort of, there are a lot of options out there. Don from our Facebook page said he bought a Subaru Solterra, but that he wasn't a fan of what he called the government forcing it on us through regulation. What is that sort of perception? Because it does kind of feel like unless you get into the sort of nitty gritty of the rules, where you look and say, oh, it has to meet a vehicle has to meet certain emission standards. It isn't saying electrification is what you have to do. It's just saying that it has to meet certain standards. So there is a regulation here, but it isn't necessarily saying you have to go out and buy an EV, right?
That's right. And in particular, I think we're talking about the EPA greenhouse gas rule that reduces, that's meant to reduce tailpipe emissions from vehicles. So, yeah, government doesn't ever say use this technology or else. It's, here's a limit on what you as a car manufacturer, what your fleet emissions can be. And then automakers can use whatever combination of technologies are available to get there. They can invent new ones if they want to, as long as they're meeting those emissions regulations. So there's not a push towards EVs necessarily. Once again, it's just what the market is choosing. This is what consumers are spending their money on. They're choosing to buy. They're immensely popular for a lot of good reasons. As I said, I talked about the cost savings. I talked about the ease of charging if you do have charging at home.
So I know that it isn't just about necessarily what consumers want, but it's also what is easiest for the automakers, right? In order to meet those goals, that they try different things in electrification. I know Toyota was really into hybrids, and they're still talking about that as sort of an overall electrification. Honda with hydrogen. There are just sort of other ideas out there. And I know some of the domestic automakers is flex fuel, but it seems like electrification it's just sort of what's winning. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. The market is speaking, and this is what it comes down to. So, you're right. It's easier for automakers to comply making electric vehicles. At the same time, consumers on the other end are, they're loving electric vehicles. So manufacturers know, like automakers know, that if they make EVs, they will sell, right? There are a lot of EVs that have long waiting lists. People are actually willing to wait a year or more if there aren't enough. I mean, this is just, this is just a time of EVs. I mean, EVs are immensely popular.
Yeah, that
Recently,
growth is really. I mean, it's still a tiny fraction of the cars out there, but
right.
the number of people asking us about EVs is just huge. The number of people who are actually buying them is way bigger than it was, and the number of cars
Yes.
out there is bigger than it was. So yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It feels like a sort of seismic change in the auto industry. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think by the end of last year, only about 800,000 EVs had been sold. We are well into 3 million EVs already this year, and it's not even the end of the year yet. So, yeah, we're seeing the price of EVs come down over time, and that is also fueling this growth in EV market share. I think Tesla, for instance, has slashed their prices several times this year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And consumers are winning because of that.
Yeah, I know. And also, I mean, just GM saying, oh, we're not going to cancel the Bolt. We're going to bring the Bolt back. We're going to bring it back in this new Ultium architecture. We're going to have to make some inexpensive EVs for folks. For a while
Yeah.
there, I was looking and thinking, these are expensive toys for rich people. But as those, we still have the Bolt, we still have the Leaf, we have the price coming down on the Model 3, we have cars coming out like the Blazer, we have the price coming down on the Lightning, so yeah, absolutely. We have a question from Lindsay from Illinois, who asks, it seems to me that the idea of burning fossil fuel, converting and delivering that power to run a vehicle is an absurd construct without some expected significant tech breakthrough on renewable sources of electric power. Isn't the electric car of the foreseeable future a bit of an energy inefficient shell game? At the end of the game, we have a highly toxic lithium ion battery to dispose of. And that's a question we get a lot, because there are emissions from particulates from the tires of EVs. There is that, the mining of the lithium. There's the getting the energy to your house to plug in. But where is that in terms of compared to just bringing your gas powered car to a gas station and filling up?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I get why people might be concerned. I do want to say that EVs are among the best solutions we have today if we are looking to reduce emissions. Again, I worked in oil and gas, for many years, and I can tell you that bringing, gasoline to market is not emissions free.
Hmm.
We did what we could, but there were emissions associated with that as well. With EVs, even though there are emissions associated with the production of them, on average in the US, if you're driving an EV, you are reducing emissions by 80% compared to a gasoline vehicle. Now, if you're in a state that is primarily producing electricity from, let's say, dirty sources, and I'll give the example of West Virginia. They have, I think over 90% of their electricity comes from coal. They are still EVs in that state are still reducing emissions by about 50%. On the other hand, if you're in a state like Oregon, where the majority of the electricity comes from cleaner sources like hydroelectric power, you'll find that in that state you're reducing emissions about 92% if you're driving an EV. So they're not yet a perfect solution, but they're among the best that we have today.
Yeah, it's about the efficiency of the sort of centrally making the power for the vehicle as opposed to having your own little generator driving around.
I couldn't have put it better,
Yeah.
right? That's exactly.
I think I could have, but but it's something like that. Something like that.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
yeah, and then when it comes to the battery disposal, that sort of thing, again, those are relevant and good questions to ask. I think a lot of automakers are they're allowing batteries to be returned to them and they're recycling them. So again, this is not a case where you throw out the battery, it goes back to the automaker and they find a way to reuse those materials, right? Those materials, the lithium and so on in the lithium ion batteries, those can absolutely be recycled. And so understanding that, again, there are emissions associated with getting them out of the ground and all of that, this is one way that we can reduce those emissions. We can just reuse the materials we've already taken out.
Yeah. I think something that keeps coming up is that this is really a transition period, right, where we're figuring these things out kind of as we go. And, when I think of transitions and bridging gaps and things, we did an episode not too long ago on plug-in hybrids. And to me, a plug-in hybrid really feels like that kind of I want some electrification in my life, but it doesn't fit everything. And I know they're not the best choice for everyone, and that they're very good choices for a small group of people. But one of the comments that we got was, if everyone bought hybrids, the Earth would be better off than if a few people go out and buy EVs. And I know that some automakers have just given that as what they've said as well. Are there other options out there for folks who maybe a pure EV isn't necessarily gonna fit what they need? Where do we stand with hybridization? Is that going to get us? Could we just all get hybrids and it would magically fix everything and climate change stops. Where are we with those?
So, as you said, everyone sort of has different needs. For the people who really want to reduce their emissions, but they're thinking right now, I'm not able to drive an EV. It's just not the right choice for me. There are a group of fuels called low carbon fuels, right? These are alternative fuels that produce fewer greenhouse gas emissions when compared with gasoline. So, some of them can be used in existing conventional gasoline vehicles without changing the engine at all. So blends of ethanol and gasoline, up to about 20% ethanol. For diesel vehicles, B5 up to B20. So you're blending biodiesel with diesel.
Yeah, so these are the blends that you kind of see anyways at the gas station, right? These aren't things that people have to go and get special. They're already available at the gas station now, right?
Yes, you may have to go to special gas stations for some of them, as in you won't find them in every gas station. So there are fuels called flex fuels that have higher blends of ethanol. E85 is one example. The blends can be up to 85% ethanol. For that, you would need a special engine, and you probably won't find that in every gas station, but they do exist and they are available. Other examples that would require brand new technology are hydrogen vehicles, right? So hydrogen is a low carbon fuel, but you can't use that. You can't pump hydrogen into your regular gasoline car. You would need a brand new technology to make that work. So there are options depending on what you're comfortable with and how much you want to make a change.
Yeah, you mentioned hydrogen. We had a Hyundai Nexo, we had a Toyota Mirai at the track, and they were great until they ran out of hydrogen and we had to put them on a truck and ship them back to California because there's nowhere outside of California to fill them, and even in California, it's a very very limited infrastructure. So I mean, these are sort of technologies that, like you said, the automakers kind of tried them out, but it's sort of electrification. That's sort of the way, right? That's kind of how is that? Am I oversimplifying or?
I think that's a fair assessment. I would say in general, every fuel has its pluses and minuses. I think with hydrogen, you hit on the biggest disadvantage, which is just the infrastructure doesn't exist ubiquitously, right? You can't find hydrogen fueling stations, generally speaking, outside of California. I know within California, the government is trying to improve even what exists there. There are car makers that are still making hydrogen vehicles even today. So for the people who are, for whatever reason, and that's the choice that they've made, that's what works for them. It's excellent. Hydrogen can be more expensive when you compare it with gasoline, but on the plus side, a lot of automakers will give you 2 or 3 years of free fuel. And so again, for some people, the math just works out. You're saving money because you're buying this car and you're not paying to fuel it for a couple of years. So yeah, pluses and minuses with everything.
And we always have to note on some of the tax credits in the articles that we're working on, little parentheses, and some fuel cell vehicles also qualify. What about this question I get often, and I know we hear about in Europe, we hear often about, these schemes for scrapping vehicles to get old cars off the road and replaced with newer vehicles. And that's not something that we had cash for clunkers, but that was more of a help the industry thing, sell more cars during a recession as opposed to, but no one's really proposing coming and taking our gas cars away from us. But we do get questions sort of about, I already have a car, it's paid off, it runs fine. Isn't it more wasteful to scrap that car than to and go out and buy a brand new EV than it is just keep driving it? Or they want to buy something that saves fuel, but an EV just doesn't work for them. What can be done for folks who want to hang on to that car that they have now? What does the future look like for them in a world that's rapidly electrifying?
Right. So let me start out by saying that, cash for clunkers or like scrapping old cars, there are local programs that exist, right? Some states have programs like that. California, for sure, is really trying to improve things for communities that have, really bad air pollution. And so in those communities, they've had programs where they offer money for people to be able to buy new cars. So you trade in your old car and you get a clean, a new clean vehicle.
Mm.
So those are certainly going on around the country. Now, for people who are saying, well, I don't want to swap things out because I have a car and it's perfectly fine and I don't want to be wasteful. Again, that's a valid point. And that's where, again, these low carbon fuels come in handy. So you can hold onto your car for, the remainder of its life. As you mentioned, Keith, we're in a transition period. So I don't think it makes sense to expect people who have a perfectly functioning car to give it up and switch to an EV today, especially if it doesn't quite make sense for them yet. They don't know what they're going to charge, all of this stuff. But what you can do if you care, if reducing your emissions is important to you, you can fuel with a low carbon fuel. So you can fuel with, E15 or E10, which is available throughout most of the country. As you said, you go to most, 98% of the gas stations around the country will carry that.
And if you're not quite ready, maybe the hybrid, maybe the plug-in hybrid, maybe there are the kind of the steps you can take along the way.
Exactly. More efficient vehicles, you're reducing the emissions that you're putting out per mile that you're driving, right? The more efficient the vehicle is. So that's exactly right.
Or better yet, if you have the opportunity to work from home, if you take public transit, if you can cycle, if you can whatever, not take a car to begin with. Personal transportation has its always has its downside. EVs aren't gonna fix traffic jams. They're not gonna fix all that stuff. So
that's a valid point again. But it comes down to what your needs are, where you live. I've certainly lived in cities where if you didn't have a car, you just were not able to get to work because there's no public transit. I'm fortunate I live in DC now, and I can take the metro wherever I need to go. I can walk a lot of places even. So I don't have a car. I gave my car up a couple of years ago. But, like 5, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, I couldn't do that. So trying to be understanding of the fact that everyone just, again, has different needs. So we are presenting the different options available to people, depending on what your needs are.
Yeah, I think the options part is the most, and I think it's interesting for me to hear that from you, who's on the advocacy side, but also understands where things are coming from the technical side of things.
Yeah.
That I think in 20 years we're probably all going to be driving electric cars, but right now it is that transition time. And in 20 years, who knows? In 5 years, who knows what that technology will be? But for right now, it's this transition time, and things are weird now. They're expensive for a lot of reasons. If you're buying a gas car, it's expensive.
Right.
So and not everyone can not everyone can plug in at home. Not everyone can. Not everyone can take a train. Not everyone can work from home,
Right.
So absolutely. That the choices out there is, that's what kind of, I guess, trying to help people with here.
Absolutely. A lot of the work my team does is forward looking, right? How do we make sure that EVs are a real option for people? How do we make sure that if people want to buy hydrogen vehicles, it's a real option for them? So if I want to buy an EV today, it's a little difficult for me. I don't have charging in my building. I'm working on that. But in the meantime, there are other things that we could do. So government is rolling out the bipartisan infrastructure law money. So there's funding for EV charging. So we are weighing in making sure that when the new charging is put in place, it's put in place equitably so that really everybody has the option to have charging close to them. Another barrier that we've brought up a time or two is the costs of vehicles, right? The cost of EVs. Prices are going down. They're much cheaper today compared to just 2 or 3 years ago. But people still need help, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act really provides tax incentives that bring down the cost of EVs, bring down the cost of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, as you mentioned. And again, it's just because government is trying to make sure that we are reducing emissions across the board. So making it easier for more people to drive lower emitting vehicles This is one way to do that, provide tax credits.
And used cars too. I mean, we're seeing you can get $4,000 off the price of a $25,000 vehicle. That's really bringing the cost of EVs down for folks, and plug-in hybrids too.
Absolutely. 4,000 for used vehicles, 7,500 for new vehicles. And starting in January of 2024, people will actually be able to take advantage of those tax credits at the point of sale. That's a huge deal because a lot of people don't even have the tax burden to get the 7,500 off, maybe not even the 4,000. But at point of sale, they will be able to. So the way the IRA was rolled out allows people to pass on to use the tax burden of the dealership or the automaker. And that means that a lot of people will be able to afford EVs.
Yeah, it's going to be so much easier. You don't have to have an accountant to figure it out. You can just do simple taxes, and you just get the money when you buy the car.
Right.
It couldn't be easier. I have one last question for you.
Yes.
I have to ask, who is harder to lobby, your building's homeowners association to put in a charger, or the federal government? I understand if you don't want to say that on the record. I've lived in buildings. I wouldn't want to cross some of my old supers.
Well, I have good news. My HOA is amazing. I mean, I mentioned it once, and they took it and ran with it. And so I fully expect to have charging in my building in the foreseeable future, like probably before the end of this year. And then on the other hand, this administration is also very into clean transportation, sustainable transportation. So loving the fact that they've rolled out the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act. Just they're doing a lot to make sure that these vehicles are, as you said, a real option for people. There's one thing I haven't mentioned that I absolutely have to. EVs are so much fun to drive. They really are. They are. I mean, low carbon fuels are for sure an option for people who can't buy or own an EV today. But if you can test drive an EV, I strongly encourage you to, because you will fall in love and you will never want to go back.
Well, Dr. Warren, thank you so much for joining us. I'll be talking to you, I'm sure, for articles that I'm working on upcoming. But we might have another episode where we have more questions from folks who send their questions to TalkingCars@iCloud.com. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to our listeners, members, and readers for talking cars with us. We'll talk again soon.